Hi, my name is Heather Murphy, and this is my Module 14 case study. First, we kind of need to establish the facts and summarize the case study so we kind of understand what's going on. The case study took place at Rocket Junior High, where there's 900 students. The people involved was Richard Inman, a first-year assistant principal, James, a 15-year-old student, David, an honor student, and he was 13 years old, a teacher and a school police officer. Richard Inman was a Southside man himself that had been making connection with students from the Southside as well, especially James, who was the ringleader of those students. Richard had to call James into his office to follow up on his third tardy for the week. When he was heading back to class, James's teacher witnessed James giving something to a student. She did believe that it was drugs, so she called Richard, and then Richard made a decision and had David, the student that James was giving something to, escorted into his office. He also brought James into his office and the police officer all at once. They did find brass knuckles on David, and so immediately the school officer handcuffed David, and then James did speak up and say he threatened David to hold onto them for him, and Richard was super excited because that's a lot of progress made for James to kind of stand up for the student. But instead of unhandcuffing David like he assumed, the school officer handcuffed James as well, and he took them both to jail because there's a policy at school, a no weapons policy, to expel any student for 45 days and send them to the district disciplinary alternative education program if they are caught with weapons on school. James' mother was fine with this because this wasn't James' first offense. He has been expelled before, and she even told him to leave him in there for a couple days and maybe he'd change his ways or think about what he did. David's mother, on the other hand, did not understand this at all. She did not understand why David was getting punished after James admitted that they were his and that he threatened David to hold on to them. So Richard ended up filling out paperwork for James, but not for David. And a week later, Richard was informed by the director of secondary education to file the expulsion papers, or Richard himself would be written up. Looking at the legal and ethical decisions in this case, some legal decisions: weapons are prohibited on school grounds. It's like that for every school. The school policy is to expel any student caught with a prohibited weapon for 45 days. Also, there may be some legal decisions on David and just his student rights. And then as assistant principal, you have to follow the contract you sign and the policies and procedures. And so there may be some legal actions taken on Richard if he does not follow those policy and procedures put in place. Some ethical decisions. Just throughout the whole case study, while David did have the weapon, bullying or harassment could have been involved. So there are some ethical decisions that I did not know if that was the best decision made. He was escorted into the office right after getting the brass knuckles, so he was not questioned by the teacher who saw the interaction, and he was not given a chance to come up himself and say, I do not feel comfortable with this, I was just threatened to take these, but I want no part into this. So he never got a chance to kind of speak up and tell his story. He was handcuffed right away after finding the brass knuckles, even after they were out of his possession. I was wondering if that's an ethical choice because he was not a threat to anyone, so I don't feel like there was a need to just immediately handcuff him, especially since this is his first time and he's an honor student and he hasn't been in trouble before. It could be very scary to him. And he was also taken to jail right away, just following the system and the policy put in place, but it was his first time offense. I don't feel like there was enough time to question him and kind of let him know what was going on. I felt like everything happened super fast for him. And then also Richard was told to follow policy or he'd be written up. So it kind of sounds like he just had to conform. No one was asking questions about what happened or why he didn't want to fill out that form. Kind of synthesizing this whole case study in one sentence is Mr. Inman, or Richard, made multiple decisions that may have unintentionally put a student in harm's way and is now faced with an ethical dilemma on doing what is right or following policy. Next, we're going to analyze the facts and look a little bit deeper. Looking at the people, Richard was a first-year assistant superintendent. We know that he was originally from the South Side as well, and he was working hard to make those connections. He was staying late, playing basketball, and working really hard to make those connections with those kids that are a little more difficult. We don't know what his previous job was, if it was in the same town or city or if he came from somewhere else. We don't know what the demographics of his previous job was as well. So we kind of don't know too much about him. James, we know he's a 15-year-old boy. We know that he has gotten in trouble before. He is from the South Side, and he's a leader of all those students from the South Side. But he is trying to change his ways. He hasn't gotten in trouble for months beforehand, so you can tell that he's trying to make those changes. We don't know. I would like to know more about the situation that he said he had to take care of after school with the brass knuckles. And I also kind of want to know about his relationships with David and why he chose David to hold on to these brass knuckles for him. So I'd like to know a little bit more about that. The school police officer, we know that he escorted David to the office right away, and he immediately handcuffed David, and so that shows me that he's a policy follower. He knew the policy and the rules, and he immediately handled it, so he kind of sees things as black and white. We don't know how long he's been working for the school or what his last job was, and we don't know the relationship between him and these two boys. Since Richard was a first-time offense student, I don't believe that they had a big relationship, but I know that since James is a multiple offense student, they might have had a relationship, and that might have led to how the police officer reacted in that situation. The teacher, we just know that the teacher immediately called Richard because she assumed it was a drug problem, though she didn't see anything. We don't know how long she's been teaching or how long she has been working there. We don't know the relationship with the two students there, and I would really like to know why she didn't question the students right away, or especially David, since she assumed that David had something in his possession before calling Richard, and kind of having the situation go that way. And lastly, David. We know that he's an honor student. He was in the band. He's 13 years old, so he's younger than James, and he had no record before this incident. We don't know. I'd like to know the relationship between James and David, and I would like to know why he took the brass knuckles. I know James said he threatened him, but I want to know, like, at the end, what was his decision to take those brass knuckles. Next, we're going to analyze the place. So Racket Junior High, we know there's 900 students, and diverse group of students and kind of where they come from. And it would be an urban community, I assume. I'm from a rural community, and we do not have 900 students there, so I feel like it is a city. We don't know the demographics of the school, the physical condition, or where the school's at, the city or the state. And then analyzing the program, we know there's 900 students. They have ages 13 to 15 at least. It could be more than that. And there's multiple teachers, so they must have periods. We don't know what type of school. Is it a public or private school? We don't know the programs that are in that school or what grade levels. We know there's the grade levels for ages 13 and 15, but does it continue all the way through high school or does it go lower than that? And so those are some things that we kind of have to figure out as well. The stakeholders that are involved here, James is a stakeholder and his mother, but I also thought that students that, since he's a leader, that follow his lead were also stakeholders, because if this has a negative impact on James and then he decides to come back to school and not participate and not work and not do his homework, then his leader or his followers may follow his lead, and then that would affect the community as they get out of school. And if they're not communicating with other students, that may affect the community of the school, and then outside the school into their own personal community if they are not getting the knowledge or the education they need or building those relationships with the community and the students in the school. David and his mother was also stakeholders involved. David, if he does get expelled for 45 days, this would show on his transcripts when he's trying to get into college, so it could affect his career choice and also his life, just like in getting in college and different things as well. Richard is also a stakeholder because if he does not write up David, his career could be in jeopardy, but if he does, that's an ethical decision that he had to make, and he just has different decisions to make, and the outcomes are based on what he decides. And the school board and community, again, would have a position in this. The community with the students that follow James, and just the community of the school and how this would play out. And the school board, of course, with if the students get expelled, since they are under the school board, and they make those kind of decisions with the policy and the procedures put in place. Some stakeholders that I feel like should be informed of this situation that I was not sure if they were, since it was not in the case study. The principal, during the whole case study, it was just Richard taking care of this situation. The principal was never informed of what was happening. It didn't seem like the principal was informed when Richard was notified a week later to fill out the forms. The superintendent, I feel like, should be informed on what is happening with the school, especially if David is a first-time offender and Richard does not want to fill out that form. And also the Board of Education, I feel like, should be involved once we figure out what is going on. That way they have all the information, and so they can see how the policy and procedures affect students in real life. And I do not feel like there's enough information right now to make a decision. The situation definitely needs to be analyzed and assessed more. I feel like everything happens so fast without getting all the information. And so I feel like we need more information before making a clear-cut decision, especially one as drastic as it's suspending a first-time offender for 45, or expelling a first-time offender for 45 days. So some options I kind of went through. The first one is do nothing. So if I was in Richard's position and I did nothing, I could be written up and potentially get fired. I could go public with the incident and how the school policy is broken and needs to be fixed, so I could go public about it. I could write up David and get him expelled, so I kind of follow the policy. I could go to the school board with the situation and maybe show them that this is kind of not your normal student to be caught with weapons. Or I could talk to my principal and superintendent and ask them to start an investigation on the situation before making any decision about expelling any students. So in evaluating these and the pros and cons, we could write David up and get him expelled. For me, my pro would be I would not lose my job, and then I could start working on changing the policy using this as an example. The cons I would not be advocating for an ethical decision. I'd just be following the policy, and David would be expelled, and it may change his life and career path. I could go public about the incident and how the school policy is broken, needs to be fixed. The pros would be it may bring awareness to the community that changes need to be made, and the school board may change the policy, or we could definitely get fired for going public like that, and the school board may not change the policy anyways. Do nothing and be written up. David would continue to get going to school would be a pro, and he would not have it on his record, but the cons would be that I'd get written up and I could potentially be fired. Going to the school board with the situation, pro, she'd be advocating for David and modeling ethical behavior, and the school board may change the policy and David could stay in school. The cons would be they may tell you to fill out the form anyway, and they may not change the policy. And then talking to our principal and superintendent and asking them to start an investigation. Pros would be advocating for ethical decision making, allows everyone to get involved. That way we can hear all sides of the story, and may show the school board and others that the policy needs to be reformed. Cons would be after the investigation, they could still decide to write up David. And they may not believe that the policy is broken. They may still want you to follow the policy. In my making a decision, I would choose to talk to my principal and superintendent and ask them to start an investigation on the situation. It allows all stakeholders to be involved, especially the principal, superintendent. We could investigate and see what really happened, what the teacher saw, ask her questions about why she didn't investigate, the school officer and his role and why he took immediate action, David's side, James' side, how it fits with the policy and procedures. And then we could see why the policy may need to change for establishing an ethical framework for the school and modeling ethical behavior. And then information would be brought to the board and parents at the end of the investigation. My action plan would be to open the investigation, set up a team, the superintendent, principal, board members, investigate all sides of the story, how the policy may need to change, and then take the results back. And so work on making a school's ethical framework policy that would work for all students, especially first-time offenders to multiple-time offenders. Setbacks, hopefully my outcome, David will not be expelled and the policy will be changed. If not, I'll continue to advocate for ethical decision-making in the school setting and have my teachers do the same and really work on changing the policy if that does not happen. And then plan B, I'll just continue to work on changing the policy and fixing that ethical framework and find ways to help James and David and keep building those relationships with those students. Thank you for listening.